I will never sexualize violence again. I won't be a part of it. And when that poor director in Heart of Stone said, "You're looking grotesque, your face, I don't want you to look grotesque, you won't like it," I lost it because, no, this is grotesque. That's not pretty, and I won't make it pretty. And I feel bad about it now. I wish I could find him and say I was going through stuff. Back then, I went back on set and no one talked about it because they thought that was the way to deal with it. But what it did was make me feel like I was out of my mind. And I think for anyone who's been traumatized, and there are a lot of men and women who have been, we need to be able to speak. Hi, non-visitor here, Major Kira Deep Space Nine, and the author of Open a Channel, A Woman's Trek. And here we are on Trek Untold.
Hello and welcome back to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I am your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. On this podcast, I have looked at and talked to many authors of different books in the Star Trek world and sci-fi world in general. And I've usually had to say good words about them because they've all been good books. That much is true. I don't have bad books on my podcast, and I won't review a bad book if I know it's going to be not worth my time, and especially not worth your time. But in the case of what we're looking at today, this is a book that I can highly recommend, and I've got a lot of really great things to say about it. And likewise, I have a lot of amazing things to say about the guest who is also the author of this book. And that will be a returning guest of this podcast, the Visitor. And you all may remember her best as Kira Nerys on all 7 seasons of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And now she can add author to her list of credits because she has just written a wonderful new book called Open a Channel, A Woman's Trek. This book is looking at Star Trek through a very different lens than what you get with the average Star Trek book. In the case of Open a Channel, we're viewing this whole franchise through the lens of, well, a woman, as the title mentions. The Visitor spoke to people throughout the many different iterations of Star Trek, whether it was from the original series, whether it was Nana's era with the TNG series, Voyager, with DS9 and Enterprise, and even into now the modern new Trek series like Discovery and Strange New Worlds. And what makes it so special is that one-of-a-kind perspective, and this is really an untold story in a lot of ways. We've heard some of these people do interviews before, we've heard all sorts of things in Trek talk in that vein, but never really this deep into the realm of what it's like being a woman as part of the Star Trek universe. And you might think there's not really much of a story there, but I gotta tell you guys, I've read, again, a lot of Star Trek books, not just for this show, but for myself and my own entertainment. And this book, as I told Nana, was truly life-changing for me. And I'm not the only person who feels that way about it. There's a lot of stories I'd never heard before. There's a lot of perspectives I'd never considered before. And it really forced me to confront a lot of my own biases that I didn't even realize I had. So yeah, I'm gonna give this book so many high recommendations and so many thumbs up, I'd run out of arms real quickly. But this truly is like one of my favorite Star Trek books, and I can say that now. Like, I wanna say it's in my top 3, it might even be my number 1 right now. I don't wanna sound hyperbolic, but I'm really not being hyperbolic at all. I really love this book that much, and there will be a link in the show notes to pick this up if you'd like a copy for yourself. But as far as our chat with Nana today, this is actually a throwback because we last spoke to her way back in episode 100 of this podcast, and right now we are inching closer towards number 200 right now. So I was hoping to find a way to chat with her again, and the timing just worked out perfectly here today. And I will warn everybody who's listening, just like that first episode, we are going to delve into some very heavy topics because Star Trek has a lot of deep issues, and there's a lot of trauma that comes with the people who are behind the scenes of the story as well, including Nana. So I am going to say, without spoiling things too much, that some viewer discretion is advised, especially for listeners or viewers under the age of 18. So I really enjoyed this chat with Nana. I always love talking to her, but really this one was so open and so amazing, and I think you guys are going to really like it also. So let's go ahead now, sit tight, pull up a chair, get your headphones on, whatever you got to do to get comfy, because we're chatting with the Visitor all about a woman's trek and her journey now into a whole different world of the Star Trek universe. But before we get into our interview with this week's guest, I want to ask you guys if you are following Trek Untold on social media. You can follow Trek Untold on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, all at Trek Untold. And stay tuned, we're probably going to pop up on Blue Sky very, very, very soon. If you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, please make sure you are subscribed to it wherever you are listening to it. And if you can, leave a 5-star review and rating when possible. If you're one of the fine folks out there who is watching this on YouTube, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date on all the latest episodes that are coming out. If you're in a position to financially support this show, please consider doing that on Patreon, and you can help us out here by visiting patreon.com/trekuntold. Doing so will allow you to get all sorts of perks and bonuses, including early access to episodes, a chance to ask guest questions of your own, and a few other things here and there as we continue to build this Trek Untold community. So with all of that out of the way, it's time to beam in this week's guest. Computer, access interview file. She played our favorite member of the Bajoran Resistance on Star Trek DS9 for 7 years, and among her many accolades on stage and screen, we can now add author and Star Trek historian to that list of credits. Nana Visitor, welcome back to Trek Untold.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being here again. I have to tell you, I loved our first chat. I'm going to get into that in a second here, but we're going to talk some Star Trek history today. We're going to talk some Nana history. And I think we're going to get a little nerdier than we have in the past here, because how often do I get to talk to a person who's in the franchise as a performer who now also knows all this history and who has become an archivist of the franchise. But I do have to say, first things first, I do want to start this. Normally I end my interviews by doing this, but I want to start this by showing you some gratitude, because our first interview that we did, I guess 2-ish years ago, that has done so much for my show. For real, I have to tell you, what I do is when I send out my cold emails to talent or representatives, I will send them a few links to what I've done in the past, and I've used yours on the top of that list. And several actors and performers have actually watched that entire interview. They've told me that, and they were just amazed at just how giving you were, how honest you were, how open the conversation was. They very much applauded you for dealing with all of your trauma and many of the things you've gone through in your career and your life and your struggles. So thank you for what you gave to me on that podcast, because that has done so much more for me for years now. So thank you.
How wonderful. Thank you so much.
But that's enough of my rambling for now. We are here to discuss something that we talked about in our first interview, and that was your new book, Open a Channel, A Women's Trek. And that is 60 years of Star Trek history from the untold perspective of the women who made it, from the actors to the writers and everyone else in between, and showing a side of Trek that has often been kind of lost in the discussion of Star Trek history. Now, like I mentioned, when we first had our talk initially, you kind of mentioned that you had just begun working on it. And I think you had just started doing the interviews for the book. So again, congrats on adding this to your list of accolades here. But how has the reception been so far for the book?
It's been really very positive. And there have been so many men who have said, it shifted me to read it. And that's huge. That's just huge. I was just reading, David Brooks has a wonderful article in The Atlantic about the Ivy League. But in it, he talks about when Germany, at a certain point, tried to make the forests an industry, they started talking about the trees as timber, something that they could, sell. It became something sellable. It was no longer a tree, it was timber. And so they decided that it was timber and it was underbrush. So they got rid of all the underbrush and the trees died because the trees needed all kinds of things from the underbrush. All that to say, we all need each other very much. And it's one of the great things that Star Trek talks about, the diversity and the working together and the cooperation. So through the years, that's what I saw in Star Trek. And the men who have read the book show me that we just need to talk. We need to have a conversation.
I love that metaphor you just mentioned, by the way, about the underbrush and the trees. That's brilliant, and it's very true. And I am one of those men who read that book, and I wrote back to you and told you it was life-changing. I didn't know what to expect reading the book, but just the stories, the struggles, some of them I knew, a lot of them I didn't. And I feel like I just was able to not only just sympathize but empathize and reflect on the series and what it's done and what it means in just a very, very, very different way. And I'm very happy I got to have that experience thanks to what you wrote.
I love that. I love that.
This has really been, I think, an epic undertaking because this has been literally years in the making for you.
Oh god, it's so epic because don't forget, I wasn't like so many audience members who just naturally it's like they're on their 3rd watch of, all of Star Trek and all. I hadn't watched the other shows, so I needed to do that. I needed to read books every time I got tripped up. I needed to do interviews, endless interviews with audience members because that's the other part. That's the part that you didn't mention, the women in the show, behind the scenes, the writers, all of that. The audience made the show too.
Mm.
So it's truly a collaborative effort and what comes out of it. It's unusual to work in a show and do conventions while you're working in it and have feedback and understand. Now I'm sure everyone gets instant feedback because of, the media and because of social media.
Right.
But back then there was a disconnect and we were connected all that time to what people were getting out of it, what was important, and we were able to amplify those things as we were working.
I'm curious to know for you because you are a person who has worked in the creative arts, whether it's been on stage or screen, and I'm sure you've done a lot of writing. But this is now like your writing. It's this is historical writing. So this has, I imagine, must have been kind of like different for you to wrap your head around this project because it is a very different type of work.
Matthew, it was so overwhelming. There were times I'm at the bottom of the house here. I would be climbing the stairs crying and going, "It's too much. I can't. I don't know
It's only
how.
60
I
years.
do not know how." And there's so much not in there, but that's the nature of it. You get down what you can and certainly it was an emotional experience too, because I had to take a hard critical look at myself and looking at what affected me in my years
Mm.
of, like the 80s and 90s when I was out in Hollywood really working a lot. Broadway is a little more it's a very small world, so the damage or whatever happens there, it was very small. Um, Hollywood was a different story, and I had to be honest about the effects, how it shifted me, how it stuck me in places. Go down a rabbit hole someday, because I did for probably 2 weeks, and look at old commercials and old copy ads,
Mm.
and you see how we're told by the culture what men are supposed to be, what women are supposed to be, and sometimes it's really funny, and sometimes it's really shocking, and sometimes it's really sad because growing up in all of that, it it was just it became part it's like all the plastic bits that now are part of our body,
Yes.
that those concepts became a part of me. You have to rip them out.
And that's one of the major themes in the book too that you talk about in nearly every section is the box that people are put in. The box that you are forced to go in as the role that you are supposed to be playing. And that's just not necessarily the role you're playing on screen. It's the role you're supposed to play in life. And it's frustrating for me to
Yeah.
read as a man. I can't imagine living it.
Well, but I think that you probably do to a certain degree. The things that you see as important are maybe a little bit, perhaps, dictated by your age group, by what people are valuing now.
Mm.
And it's not necessarily something that sprung from you. The schools, the way we're taught, we're given tests. We're not rewarded for curiosity or finding our own way. We're told you need to do well on tests because the schools need you to do well on tests, then you get better schools and it's kind of we're stuck from then on.
Mm.
And we're not rewarded for our own strengths. That's something that we have to do on our own. We have to look at ourselves and go, "Okay, what are my strengths? And how can I play those into my life so that I give back to other people with my specific strengths?"
Well, before we start getting too deep into my own personal trauma, because that's, I think, a different podcast episode for us, uh, let's talk some Trek history, Nana. I'm not ready for this today. We're not doing this conversation today. This is all about your trauma today, Nana.
Can't help myself. I cannot help myself. All right. Okay.
But yeah,
All
no,
right.
but I totally agree. No, what you're saying is absolutely true.
Trek. Let's talk Trek.
Let's get nerdy for a little bit here, and I want to start with Majel Barrett because you talk a lot about her, and I feel like people know her, but I don't know how much they really understand how much she gave to the franchise during Gene Roddenberry's lifetime and after his lifetime. And I love the story that you learned about in the book that you wrote about, explaining how she went from being number one on the pilot to becoming Nurse Chapel. I think that's kind of fun. Can you tell us that story?
Well, she was dating Roddenberry at the time, and she was determined to have a role in this new Star Trek. Now, I have to say, if it had been me, I probably would have slumped away with my tail between my legs. I was fired off the pilot. But this is a determined, powerful, creative woman, and she sat in the offices and looked through the script to find out who she could play, and she, dyed her hair blonde so the powers that be wouldn't recognize her in the audition, and auditioned for Nurse Chapel and got the role. That's the fighting against the waves against you that I talk about, the currents that can hit so hard, and they were some strong women that I talked to. I wish I'd had a chance to talk to Majel. I wish that I remembered our conversation when she took me to dinner, but we had way too much champagne
I mean, that in itself is
for
a
me to
story.
remember. And, she knew what the nurse was lacking. She talked about it herself. She's constantly looking at the Vulcan and she's lusting after some guy somewhere out out there. She didn't like that at all, but she played it because she had a voice. She was also a player behind the scenes. She influenced him a lot in terms of women as much as she could.
I think that she often gets kind of like from a lot of Trekkies, there's kind of like this division where some people love Loxana Troy from Next Generation and DS9, and others are like bleh about her. They're not too fond of the character. I think as an adult, like I feel like I get it more. I understand her there. And I'm curious now to hear, because again, you got to work with her when she was on DS9, and you got to now watch her in TNG as Loxana Troy. I wonder if you can kind of explain like why that character is really very vital to the franchise, and especially for representation of women in Star Trek.
Well, in the '80s, if you were an older woman, well, in the '60s, if you were to believe Star Trek, the original Star Trek, you politely died when you turned 40. You just didn't exist anymore. There were no women over 40. I think one character maybe, that was it. Um, and she took up space as an older woman. She represented unfortunately, what she represented was a trope of an older woman who is annoying and has no boundaries and is just interested in her daughter getting married, as if that is every older woman's only life. And it's an injustice to her because watch her stuck with Odo in a scene in Deep Space Nine. She was an amazing actress. She hands o to empathize. She compassionately when Odo starts to melt because he can't hold his state anymore, she compassionately takes her wig off to be vulnerable with him, and it is uh, made me cry.
Mm.
Gorgeous scene. She was capable of so much, and she ended up being this takeoff. I'm of the mind frame that Luoxana didn't do her justice, but it was what was offered to older women at the time.
Hmm.
It was an easy box to put older women in.
But she really did a lot with that role. And I mean, that episode you mentioned with Odo was amazing. The one that gets me tearing up is one where Odo basically is fake marrying her for the sake of helping her get out of whatever the situation is. And especially with Renee and her together, like their lines, it just feels like he's really saying those to her. And I always think it's kind of like, how often have we seen a woman who, like I said, is in that age group, who is basically going through her changing self, essentially, changing from womanhood to later womanhood. And it's a pretty beautiful thing to watch on screen. And I think she did an amazing job with the material that she had in front of her.
Yeah, without a doubt. And you see later on in the show in TNG, she gets much better material
Yes.
and she does wonderfully with it. I think that probably coincided with some women writers coming into the show and taking some interest. I think when Jeri Taylor came in, all the women benefited.
I love nerding out with you about Star Trek, by the way. This is like the dream come true. But, let's keep going on this topic here, because we're kind of mentioning Gene Roddenberry a bit as well here. And for lack of a better word, Gene Roddenberry really injected a lot of sexiness and not necessarily sexuality into Star Trek, and that very much is apparent in season 1 of TNG. But this is also the same guy who wanted to have women on the bridge. He was trying to be a feminist in his own way, but he also wanted Deanna Troi to have 4 breasts. And there are many folks who have covered this better than I have here, but there's like so much stuff in the 80s and 90s that's outdated and sexist, even by TNG season 1. How do we grapple with this man who had his own sense of feminism, but did things that really were kind of almost the opposite of that, and made this beautiful work of art we call Star Trek?
That's when you look at what was the culture at the time. Here's this World War II veteran who a friend of his told me when he was flying over Japan decided this is insanity. We need to have a federation. We need to stop these separations. So he had that thought. He was very much 1968 protester, all of that. You could see it all in Star Trek. But don't forget that at the time, women's greatest power was their sexuality.
Mm.
If they were sexy, they could get a job in Hollywood. If they were sexy, they could get a good husband. It's so important to remember women couldn't get a credit card without a man co-signing until his 70s. Hysteria was still a real diagnosis up until the 80s. So he was going, you know what? I'll make them powerful. I'll make them sexy. And you see that the women at the time felt that was their power too and wanted to use it. That's what they had available.
And there are YouTubers who have done this more in depth than I have, Jesse Gender being one of those people. And Gene, by the way, wasn't just sexist in that regard. I think he was just kind of sex obsessed. Because if you look back, you might find this in your research. He actually did basically his description of the early Ferengi, and like part of that was that they have enormous genitals. So he just had his own things. I don't know. Not gonna kink shame.
But you can't. It's everyone's got their humanity.
Yeah.
And we're all on a spectrum of some sort. But his spectrum for realizing big humanist concepts was he was very much that man. And that's what Star Trek made. I think I heard that he got better. He learned. It's harder, but not impossible for older people to learn new ways and new things. But back then, there wasn't the internet so that you could go, wait a minute, is this a sexist thing to do or say and learn? Believe me, I was on the internet going, wait a minute, bias, what am I doing here? And I go, okay, I need to read a book and go read a book. I don't think that anyone had the luxury of that kind of access to what the thought of the moment is.
Yeah, I'm just thinking now, imagine if the internet was around when DS9 was popping out, because, oh man, the fights would have been happening on Reddit. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, really.
And that kind of is the thing, too, I guess I should bring up, too, is like Gene Roddenberry had this so-called vision, and there's a lot of fans who have looked at that vision and they say, oh, Discovery, Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, these shows aren't keeping his vision up, whether it be that they're too woke, they're too argumentative, all these buzzwords that they'll throw out. Now that you've kind of gotten yourself so ingrained into this world of watching it as a viewer and as a fan, What is your take on Gene Roddenberry's vision of Star Trek and where we are now with the modern Trek shows? Does it matter if we are following his vision or not?
Yeah, I do think it matters, and I think they are, but I go by, what is it that they don't follow? What part of it do you feel they're not following?
We often see a lot of folks who are basically claiming, and the wokeism, that's the word they love to use, is, oh, there's too much of this, there's too much of that, there's too much representation. A lot of them also will then just take it from the plot aspect of like, oh, we don't like that there's so much arguing happening because supposedly in like 60s Trek there was no arguments. We were all supposed to be enlightened and beyond that. So there's basically two
Right.
sort of camps, I feel like, from people who don't like modern Trek, and those are the biggest ones right there.
Right. I mean, I understand that, the evolution aspect, and I think that's why Deep Space Nine resonates so much because it was, "How do we get there?"
Mm.
Not "We're there," but "How do we get to the original Trek?" And I feel like maybe the timelines are off because it's all an arc to get to that original Trek, to get to that Federation. Um but I feel there's an army chaplain, and I quote her all the time. What she does, what she has to prepare for, what she has to mentally do to go out on a field and prepare people to die, and in their own spiritual beliefs is astounding to me. Some people might think that, well, that's what she does, so it's easy for her. No, that's what she does, and she's courageous about it because she stays in that very, very difficult moment. And she told me 3 things that Star Trek taught her: to have hope, to have courage, and to remember you are never alone.
Mm.
And I think that all the new Treks prove that. And there are people who love it and get a lot out of it, and I respect that, but, Enterprise did not do that for me.
Well, you're not alone in that boat. Don't worry about that.
But other than that, I feel Lower Decks, it's all human there, and of course, being an alien, that's when you're allowed your full humanity in any television show. You're allowed to be absolutely who you are instead of, you know, having, uh, these boundaries that lock you into this reasonable place. It takes off the edges of who people are, and going back to that school thing where you learn how to take SATs, I had huge scores. I won stuff because of my SAT scores, but I did badly with the tests because I answered what I thought the real answer was, and then I learned, no, I'm supposed to give them the answer they want.
Mm.
Once I learned that trick, I got huge scores. So if we play that way, if we're in a patriarchy where there's only one answer, the answer they want, we cut off our curiosity, we cut off our strengths, and we cut off what makes us us. So I think the new treks, although they might not be for everyone, Discovery, although I love the cast, it was a little too dense for me to be able to take in. But Strange New Worlds, I feel, has all the life and the point of the original Trek.
And I think the thing too with these modern Treks is like the stakes are kind of up here in 2020s. You know, you look at 80s and 90s Trek and what they were talking about, and the way topics were even covered in that era. And a lot of progressive ideas were kind of downplayed in a way. It was almost like very trying to be, they were trying so hard to be centrist that they almost oftentimes lose their message and lose the power. Whereas today, these shows are not really afraid to say this is what we're actually talking about. And that seems to just bother fans, or a certain sect of fans don't seem to like the fact that the progressive elements are now just so in your face. And that's just society today, though. I mean, that's kind of where we're at. We need to like be bold and have our words be heard.
Well, also think about how many networks there were on TV. I think there were 3,
Yep, the big three.
and that was it, and there were a lot of people who looked at what was going out there and controlled it. So, of course, it gets very contained. There's so many outlets, but that's the thing too. I go back and I watch Deep Space Nine episodes. You don't like this one? Watch that one. I watch things over and over again. Um, hopefully, there's new Trek that will come up that is for the people who feel disenfranchised. But there are people, a lot of people, who feel included by this new Trek, by seeing Tilly and going, I'm not being X'd out because I look different than this standard. The standard that I made, I mean, even though I wasn't, Federation, I had a standard that my body had to be held by, and that you're eliminating a lot of talented, curious, intelligent people from taking part in the world when you do that.
One of the things that comes up in the book, and this might be something we actually touched upon in our first interview, was you talk about your marriage to Sadig and having kids and just kind of feeling split. And you also told some stories from people on set who like weren't the least bit sympathetic to your situation of being a mom while being a performer. And again, in Open a Channel, Rosalind Chow told you something very similar. I've heard Terry Farrell at conventions talk about basically not being able to kind of have the life she wanted to have professionally and personally. In fact, I have this written down here. You wrote, and I quote, most of the women I spoke to for this book had few ideas for how women could work and have relationships and children in a way that was successful for all. And there's also this double standard kind of hiding in here of like the men who probably got to have more time in their own way for that era, basically being able to have their wives, have the domestic side of things, and be able to function, whereas the women did not. Having written this book, having talked to all these different women and performers who had this similar life as you did, what are your thoughts on all this? And kind of looking back on it, do you wish you had done things differently? Could you have done things differently?
I was the breadwinner of the family, so when I took DS9, I couldn't have done things differently. My first husband and I were in terrible debt, because I stopped working. I actually bound my 5-month pregnant body to keep working, and then it I couldn't get hired anymore, of course, and I couldn't at 6 months, I popped, it was Jiffy Pop, and it was like, "There's no hiding this anymore, I can't work anymore," and so we got deeply in debt because he chose not to work. So, I took the job going, "Baby has brought a loaf of bread, and I have to do this job." It's the only job I ever did, so, there wasn't a possibility to do it a different way. And it's not like you can, as an actor, go, "Okay, now I've had children in the middle of this show, I'm gonna leave it." Um, because you never know when you're gonna work again. If you step away, if you get off the hamster wheel, chances are you won't work again.
I mean, it's kind of the age-old adage we've heard of like you can't have it all if you're in this industry and you're a woman, and that's kind of what it feels like. And hearing so many different performers in Star Trek say that, like, again, I knew some of them had said some things like that, but I didn't know just how far that really went. And it's almost like nearly every woman you talk to in this book had that exact same experience, and that's just like I'm still trying to grapple with even how I want to comment or ask you questions about it. But for me, I'm still just kind of in shock.
Well, unless you have a partner that is willing to take stuff on, and I've talked to women who do. I didn't realize, Matthew, that I completely took responsibility for when I'd go to a convention, I I would make dinners for 3 nights that I would be gone so that my husband and boys would have dinner. It was like, eh, endless work,
Mm.
endless work. I'm responsible for the home when I leave, I'm responsible for work when I'm there, and, I talked to one woman, astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti, who made me feel like the dinosaur I have been. Um, sh she was going up to the space station, in a couple of weeks when I first interviewed her, and, I found out and she's unbelievable. She is an unbelievable woman, an engineer, an astronaut, a fighter pilot, with 2 children at the time under 5.
Mm.
And I said, "So who takes care of your children when you go to space?" She said, "They have a father." And I was like, "Oh my god, yes." There that should be that way. But I always took responsibility. The children were my responsibility. I was the mother. That was the viewpoint. Mothers, you are the ones responsible. Men go off and work. And if you choose to work, then that's your problem.
That goes back to the boxes we talked about earlier, and those boxes that are mentioned throughout the entire book. It's this is your role. It doesn't matter what other supplemental things you're doing. At the end of the day, this is you. This is what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not manageable and it doesn't work. And I decided that, the only one who was going to suffer was me. And I learned doing that falling asleep at the wheel isn't some kind of like, oh, I'm going to drift off. You pass out. You're driving and then you're gone because our brains can't function that way. It doesn't work. And maybe Samantha has the way it does, a husband that goes, "Now it's me, and now it's the mother, and now it's the father." Maybe that's the way it works.
I feel like this might be an okay segue for this next question here, but I'm not even sure how to really segue this one because this is, I think, a pretty serious thing that was covered in the book. And that also relates back to the DS9 episode, Heart of Stone. And in the book, you talk about several spots you talk about sexual assault that you had to endure. But in particular, you talk about your rape, which you previously discussed on Gates McFadden's podcast. And this is not even me being the interviewer, just me as the reader, as a human. I'm just like sitting and shaking while I'm reading this book. I've been dreading even trying to ask you a question about this because that one hurt. And for me, again, just like one of the parts that just really is horrible is like you had to have all that happen and then go to work the next day because Star Trek is this demanding entity. And I can't get over this. I'm not going to ask you to recount the details of any of that, of what happened. But I guess I don't even know if I have a question. I just don't understand how you functioned after that, how you kept yourself going, and how you've survived with that inside you for so many years.
First of all, it wasn't quite the next day, but it was as soon as I was supposed to be on set.
Yeah.
That's I went back and I was pretty much out of my mind at that point, but compartmentalization, which is not healthy for the most part when you do it for a long time. And the muscle in me that was strongest was my acting muscle, and Kira was in me, so I could go there, um, almost completely, not quite, because, there were things I would not do anymore, and, I was I it was so specific. I mean, I remember doing some guest star and being in a short skirt and high heels and being, kidnapped and having ropes tying me, and my heels are still on. And I thought, "I will never sexualize violence again. I won't be a part of it." And when that poor director in Heart of Stone said, "You're looking grotesque, your face, I don't want you to look grotesque, you won't like it." I lost it because, no, this is grotesque. I'm being turned into stone, and that's not pretty, and I won't make it pretty. And he was oh god, and I feel bad about it now. I wish I could find him and say I was going through stuff. But the other thing, Matthew, that I appreciate, first of all, I appreciate your compassion about it, but I appreciate you talking about it because I think that's so important. Back then, I went back on set and no one talked about it because they thought that that was the way to deal with it. But what it did was make me feel like I was out of my mind. There was no connection with anyone because it wasn't truthful, it wasn't real, and I think for anyone who's been traumatized, and there are a lot of men and women who have been, we need to be able to speak.
I mean, I was even like debating if I was going to even bring this topic up to you because, I don't want to be exploitative either of this traumatic experience that you've had in your life, but I also know that there's someone out there listening who might need to hear this. And I think it struck a chord with me, especially because like I know way too many women that have been sexually assaulted and that have been raped and they have to just go
And
back to the next day. And I don't
I
understand how.
and I know men too, and I read the chaplain's, piece that she wrote. about rape in the military of men, and men, here's a culture drip that catches men, they're not allowed to talk about it.
Mm.
They can't talk about it. That somehow affects their masculinity, and that's the stuff that not our shame. Not our shame to have. That's the perpetrator. There's a whole thing going on in France right now. Not our shame, their shame, and that's really important to remember, I think. So, yeah, people do need to know that, and they also need to why I talk about it. What makes it not exploitative to me is because there's a huge message. There is such a thing as post-traumatic growth, and I experienced it, and I feel like I like myself better because I had to tear myself apart and put myself back together, learn about my brain, learn about my nervous system, and, function in a totally different way, and, that made this second part of my life so much richer.
Mm.
So, you're not broken when you've had trauma. You are not broken.
So, Nana, I think this is something we also kind of touched upon in our first interview, and I want to kind of see how your thoughts may have changed now after writing this book. Because, trauma is kind of the theme of this interview. It's the theme of our first interview. It's the theme of your book in a lot of ways. And I think we've discussed, like, that's kind of why Nana Visitor and Kira Nerys kind of gelled so well together in Deep Space Nine. And I want to ask, what has changed? Because, now we know that Nana Visitor is an extremely tough cookie and has been. And a lot of Kira has ended up inside of you, and a lot of you is inside of Kira and what you went through during the 7 years on set. So how much of Kira is still with you today, and how much of that has changed who you are? And again, this is now looking in the last few years how you've made this book and you've gotten this whole new perspective on the franchise and what you've done. What part of Kira has really stuck with you and changed who you are?
I did do a TEDx talk on this. It's huge. It's a huge impact. Dropping her thoughts of, courage and heroism and devotion changed my brain patterns. Absolutely, there's no question about it. Um, she changed me. What I didn't realize is that the full spectrum that I allowed Kira to have, I was cutting off in my own life. I thought I had it, and until I did the book and really looked at my thinking and where certain ideas came from, what came out of my mouth, where did that come from? I didn't realize how stuck I was in, my own life,
Mm.
and I have come even closer to Kira because that was my wish for myself, how I wanted to live. That was who I really was, and I thought I matched it, but I didn't, and now I'm finding ways to have the courage to meet the moments, to respond more like Kira
Mm.
than to hide like Nana.
That's got to be such a strange thing, and that's, I guess, the life of a performer is you play this fictional character, and that person becomes you. And for 7 years, you were that person. Now, this many years later, it's even more of a tighter bond than it was when you probably were on set.
I'm lucky that she was who she was, because that can be really damaging, and I think it does damage actors, and I think this awareness of how dropping thoughts into your head that actually affect your body,
Mm.
I mean, when I'd be hiding, in a scene from somebody thinking they're gonna kill me, my heart rate was up. I had butterflies in my stomach. I'd be sweating, and that served to prove to me that what I was imagining was actually happening. That's great because that makes acting easy. But that's also traumatizing,
Mm.
and you have to know how to rid yourself of that after a scene, after a show, and I didn't. I just lived with it.
But I think writing this book, though, I mean, you probably worked through all sorts of things you didn't even realize you had hiding in that basement.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. I recommend it for everybody. If it makes you look at yourself critically and go, "Why did I say that? Why did I laugh at that? Why is that okay with me? Why didn't I speak up right there?" And now you're on your way to, finding out who you really are.
And I feel like, you probably also connected with a lot of folks who you've seen at conventions, but you've never really talked to in this kind of capacity before. And I kind of wonder, like, did you just find yourself a whole new tribe of people while writing this book?
Yes, I found the best thing to me is after talking to all these women and learning their stories, learning who they were. The '80s dinosaur that I was thought there's only one powerful woman, and, if it's not me, it's her. If she's getting a job, damn it, that's me not getting a job because that was a lot of training, women competing against each other. Now, I feel like this is a sisterhood where I go, "She got the job, yay." I'm waiting for Soneqhua to do big things. I'm waiting for a lot of these women to do their next big thing, and, uh, and I'm thrilled, honestly thrilled by it.
Mm.
I feel like we win.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And, the book talks to a lot of folks in the Star Trek world, but I imagine there's a lot who didn't make the final cut, unfortunately. And I'd love to know if there's anybody maybe you want to like highlight right now who wasn't in the final version of the book that's available right
Michelle
now.
Hurd.
If you remember any of the
Michelle
stories, anybody you'd be willing to share with us?
Michelle Hurd, Michelle Hurd, Michelle Hurd,
She's amazing.
Michelle Hurd. Now, so many of the women that aren't in the book, I didn't have the opportunity to write. Either their agents went, "Oh, another Star Trek, interview, no way. I know, I'm not gonna pass this on." Or I couldn't get a hold of them, couldn't find them anywhere, or they were busy, I don't know why, but Michelle Hurd was generous and amazing, came to my house, did a fabulous interview, and she didn't get into the book. I hate it. I guess it's because they didn't have enough Picard women to make a section, so they just didn't do it, but it hurts me that Michelle isn't in there.
That is a big one, unfortunately. But I feel like there's also plenty out there that you can now do, like maybe a sequel. Just gonna throw that idea out there, maybe. I don't know, just ideas.
Well, there's so many women and so many audience members. There were so many audience members that said, "I'd love to talk to you," had fascinating stories, just every single one. I'd love to talk to them too. It's endless. Rebecca Romijn, come
Yeah.
on. I would have loved to have spoken to her because that's really the bookend of the series. So, Jess thrilled me.
Yeah.
I love her character. I love her character, but I got a chance to talk to her, and she's in the book, so that's
Yeah.
different. But Rebecca should have been in there too.
Well, I believe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that you recorded all the interviews as well on video. So, is there any plan to do something with that footage?
Some of them, many of them, we recorded, and then when the pandemic got really bad, we just went to Zoom and we stopped filming, and the filmmakers for 55 Films got busy with Voyager, so it
Mm.
it made sense for me to go, "I gotta finish this book, so we'll just go on." But I really hope that there's a documentary in the future.
I hope so too, because there's so many stories I think you could probably squeeze into there too that didn't even make it into the final cut of the book. And I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
there's so much here that we're missing out on. I feel like there was so much great stuff, and even book the size it is, it could easily have been more. Like it should have been more for sure. I'm angry at Simon and Schuster on your behalf. Basically, I want more.
Isn't it amazing that a coffee table book, I mean, it wasn't supposed to be like this. It wasn't supposed to be this kind of book. It's supposed to be a paragraph about each woman, and they let me take it to this other level. So, it's kind of it's an anomaly. It's a coffee table book that doesn't read like a coffee table book at all.
Not at all. All right, so Nana, this has been just amazing chatting Star Trek stuff with you. Because again, like, how often do I get to talk to someone who's now like a person in a Trek show who's now also become this like hardcore Trekkie in some ways? And as someone now who's gotten to watch all these shows and has binged these shows as much as you can binge them, as a fan now, Nana, like, what has been your favorite Star Trek iteration to watch?
Uh, I'll tell you my favorite arc. How about that?
Okay, we'll take. I know that's probably like the toughest question here. This interview is, what's your favorite baby, basically?
Yeah, really. That's a tough one, but my favorite one was the one that I thought I was gonna hate, and that's, Janeway and Seven of Nine.
Yeah.
I think it was an amazing role. an amazing character, and an amazing relationship on so many different levels. And I assumed that, oh, they brought the sexy girl at the time when it happened. Oh, here's a sexy girl to save the show, like Worf is put into Deep Space Nine to save our show, and
Worf has those sexy ridges.
those sexy Worf riches.
Mm-mm-mm.
But it wasn't that at all. It wasn't that at all. And, I just found myself, not being able to stop watching that arc.
Mm.
I thought it was brilliantly written.
And I also love your section too with Kate Mulgrew. And I've heard, by the way, this just now, one interviewer to another interviewer, Nana, that she is sometimes, if you don't do your homework, if you don't come to the table prepared for Kate, she will eat you up. So I'm just curious to know what your experience is like with her, because she is a woman of power. She exudes power.
She does, and she did.
So if you can't take her on, I definitely will not go near her. Okay, good to know. Oh my goodness.
But she's also generous and, giving. As a matter of fact, she is the only person who sat next to me, and at some point, I don't remember when it was, and said, "I heard what happened," and talked to me woman to woman about it, and that was very healing. So she's tough, but deep.
Well, I'm happy to hear that that was a great experience for you, though, because I've heard things she's a great person, but she can be a tough one to crack. I know at Star Trek conventions, if she doesn't like a moderator who's doing a panel, she will just be like, no, you're gone. Go home. I'm doing this myself now.
Whoa.
She is a captain in and off that Star Trek bridge.
I have not seen that. I'm probably feverishly signing something while she's doing that. I haven't had that experience.
I think last time we talked, also, again, going back to that first interview, I believe we talked about this, and I don't remember how it came up, but I think I told you that my favorite characters in Trek, and especially in DS9, were Odo and Rom. And because those are the ones that mean a lot to me and that I can kind of relate with and identify with. And now for you, again, having watched all these different Treks, is there someone that you watched that you identified with and you felt connected to on like a personal level?
I guess that's two different things. My avatar would be Captain Kirk.
Hmm,
Um,
interesting.
but the person that I related to, I would say 7 of 9.
Really? What part of 7-9 do you see yourself in?
As, someone learning to be human.
Hmm. Do you feel like kind of like disconnected from being a human in that way? I mean,
I absolutely did, from trauma. I felt disconnected, and when you dissociate and start to, compartmentalize, uh, your emotions don't go away, they go somewhere else and do further damage, so you get far away from who you are, and I felt like my amazing doctor who started me on this path, uh, Dr. Kira Monte, was a little bit like Janeway, saying, "No, no, stay here. We're gonna get through it together." And, pointing me like Janeway points, 7 of 9 to music and art and slowly teaches her the ways of building pathways that help humans.
hmm.
I got the same experience. Read this book, look at that poetry. And so I very much see my recovery through the story of 7 of 9.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks kind of view 7 and 9's story as just basically being the Borg becoming the human, becoming the Starfleet captain, but it really is a tale of really, really serious trauma. And I guess when I think about it, I'm like, okay, well, this makes kind of more sense for Nana. I wouldn't have thought of 7 and 9, but that's actually an amazing analogy. I'm happy that you found her and that character was able to do
Yeah,
something for you.
yeah, absolutely.
So on a somewhat lighter note now, how about, again, looking at the many, many Star
I
Treks you've
keep
had to watch?
taking you there. You're trying to be light, you're trying
I'm
to
trying
I
so hard.
find it.
It just doesn't happen. It's Nana visitor and trauma. They're a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
All right, go ahead, go ahead.
All right, well, how about worst episode of Star Trek you had to sit through that you were like, this is garbage. How did this get on air? And was there an episode that maybe you liked a lot that kind of stuck with you and you were like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful thing I've watched in all of Star Trek?
All right, so I was given the job of directing what I think is one of the worst episodes. For the cruise ship, we do these staged readings. So I had all these wonderful Star Trek actors to put in this questionable script, which was so much fun. Spock's brain.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, that's
Enough said.
pretty. We don't we don't need to. It could get traumatic if I go down that.
We only have an hour to not. No.
But yeah, Spock's brain is the worst, and oh, Far Beyond the Stars.
Mm. I think that one came up in our last talk too. In fact, yeah, and a lot of people have
Stuck
said like that's just one of the best, most beautiful Star Trek's ever done.
stuck with me.
Yeah. Was there one that maybe hit you on an emotional chord? Beyond, and again, maybe not including Far Beyond the Stars, since that's the easy answer now. But was there one that kind of like you maybe were not familiar with from one of the other series that hit you, and you're like, "Wow, this is amazing. I wish I'd seen this sooner."
I don't know, I don't know the name of it, but one from Strange New Worlds hit me very strongly, that Ms. Navia did. She was actually given the main storyline, and I thought it was a beautiful one.
Oh, is that the Lotus Eaters episode where everybody loses their
Yeah.
memory?
Yes.
That's also a big part of the chapter with you talking to Melissa. In fact, was about that episode. And I'm actually happy you brought up Melissa here because I did talk to her for the last season of Strange New Worlds on this podcast. And one of the questions I threw at her was because I'd actually seen people comparing the character of Kira to Ortega's. I'd seen some people, and there was kind of some conversation about that. You know, are they similar in any ways? And she kind of agreed with that maybe there was some Kira in Ortega's. And I'm kind of curious for you. I mean, having now watched some of the new Treks too, is there someone who you feel like maybe Kira would have passed the torch on to be the next character like her in the series? Or in the franchise, rather?
I think, the build upon Kira was Soneqhua.
Hmm.
She was capable of making mistakes and learning from them, and, being a human in process.
Now, this is going to be probably, again, like choosing your favorite child here. But if there was one of the Trek series that would, let's say, maybe become your comfort show, something you could watch again and again whenever you felt like it, do you have one? I guess I should ask. Do you have one that might be like your go-to if you wanted to watch something Star Trek?
Well, the original is the comfort show that can be in the background, when you're getting ready for bed. Our show is not that. I tend to get engaged and, it's not comforting in that way, it's engaging. Um, and I'd say not next gen, Strange New Worlds would be my next choice.
See, I would actually watch DS9 as my late night show because I want some midnight trauma. So that's just me.
Midnight Trauma.
My favorite thing. If I'm going to have night terrors, I want it to be with Captain Sisko.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. That's a good way of looking at it.
Now, I know that you kind of came into this book as like an outsider as far as the Trek fandom went, but I feel like now you've probably gained a lot of new interest and definitely from the way you write about it, a lot of reverence for this franchise here. So I'm kind of curious just to get your take now on the franchise as a whole and what you think of the series. I mean, because now you are not just, again, a part of it as an actor. Now you are part of this history. Now you are an actual archivist for Star Trek. So what has it been like for you to take this journey from point A to point B? And that's a heck of a point to go to.
It's remarkable when I, take the 30,000-foot view and look down on it, I go, it's been such a dominant part of my life for decades now. And to go back and really take it apart and look at it in a different way through very specific lenses was a remarkable thing to do. It made me feel even more purposeful and more settled that I am associated with this franchise as I had the Star Trek guest stars, many of them to my house for lunch, and we talked, and they said, I think it was Barbara Luna who said, no matter what I do in my life or what I've done, and they've done a lot, all of them. I in my uh when I die, the first thing they're going to say is, she was in Star Trek. And I don't regret that now.
And now you've also helped tell more of their story, because I think a lot of those stories really have not been put out there. I mean, I was very excited, by the way, to see Sandy Campbell in your book, too, because I had her on this podcast a while ago, and that woman has some crazy stories, and just
Yes.
an amazing human being also. But yeah,
And still going and still working.
right, which is also just nuts, the fact that she's still going. But yeah, I love that you did get to spend this time with those legacy performers, because they really kind of paved the way for so much of what you did, and then the generation that's doing it right now is doing in Star Trek.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, at this point, I kind of want to move away from Trek for a quick moment here, because I'd like to get some Mama Nana advice, if you don't mind here.
Yeah, go.
We are headed now into 2025. It's going to be a period of a lot of transition in this country, and one that is causing a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety for many, many people, myself included. So what can you say to my audience to kind of help them through what could be a very long, rough period and a lot of ups and downs, and maybe more downs than we'd like to see happen?
I just read something that Leonard Cohen wrote in 1995, and it was a poem about resistance and about courage. And what he says courage and resistance is love. And that means if you walk in love and compassion, you stay right there. And that's huge resistance. The key is love, but seeing it as one of the most powerful tools of resistance. Going into hate, going into tribalism, going into, again, I'll go back to the trees. You take the underbrush away, you make it timber, it's not going to last. We all need each other. So whatever you see yourself as, the trees or the underbrush, appreciate the other, and the resistance is meeting whatever is in front of us with courage and resistance, which is love. And courage is the ability to stay in an uncomfortable moment and not need it to be different. And that's really important, because if we don't do that, if we start to resist in that way, what we're doing is allowing our nervous systems to take over, which always stops our brains from functioning. And if we can go, no, this is what is, and now I walk from here, you can think your way through what needs to be done, what makes the most sense. But if we get overtaken by hate or anything that hijacks us, we're not all there. We just aren't.
Well, can I just say that I appreciate that amazing advice, and I also appreciate how you brought it back full circle to where we started this interview with that wonderful underbrush metaphor. You made my job so much easier by doing that. Thank you for that. But to kind of wrap things up here, I remember, I think at the end of our first interview, I mentioned to you how much I love the character of Kira Nerys. I loved all of her strength and how it led me to look for a Kira in my own life. And I think reading the book now, looking back on what I said, every word I said was true. But I think it was also me kind of looking through the male gaze of my wants. And so I want to say something that I know for a fact people have said to you at conventions, but thank you for your contributions in Trek, for making people, and women in particular, know that it's okay to fight back. And I can't tell you now how many memes I see on a daily basis, especially right now when there's a lot of political turmoil happening, be it with trans rights and women's rights, whatever it might be, that have Kira in them, holding her phaser, gearing up for a battle, and telling people to resist and never stop fighting. And again, after reading your book, I have such a renewed amount of respect for you. And, we don't need Kira in a uniform holding a phaser to be our face of the resistance. We need more people like the non-visitor who soldier on every day in real life and fight the good fight to make sure what happened to you does not happen to other people. So thank you for your strength, and thank you for writing this beautiful, beautiful book that I highly recommend, and that is Open a Channel, A Woman's Trek. You can get it from Simon & Schuster. We're going to have links for it in the description and show notes for this week's episode. But Nana, thank you so much for not just this interview, but just being you and all the generosity you've given through what you've written, all your words, everything you've done for us. I could babble on and on endlessly, and I might. So I'm just going to say thank you for being you.
I can't thank you enough, Matthew. Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of Trek Untold. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to follow this podcast on social media, go ahead and check us out on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, all at Trek Untold. If you're listening to the audio version of this show, please leave a 5-star rating, please leave a review if you can, and help us get into those wonderful algorithms that we need to do to grow this podcast. And likewise, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to like the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell to get all notifications for future episodes coming your way. If you're in a position to financially support Trek Untold, please consider doing so by visiting patreon.com/Trek Untold, where you can support this show for whatever amount you'd like, and every little bit helps us continue to go at full warp speed. Don't forget to check out the show notes for any important links to things we talked about in this week's episode, and links to our Amazon storefront where you can buy some Star Trek merchandise of your own that once again helps support this channel. So until next time, I'm Matthew Kaplowitz. This has been Trek Untold, and as always, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars, is powered by the Rageworks Podcast Network and affiliated with Nerd News Today.